like Milarepa's life story. It's 1,000 years ago, and yet it's completely speaking to your mind right now. Somehow it's not weighed down with all of our, the differences of time or culture. And I think sometimes, can you imagine that you are Buddha Shakyamuni and you come to omniscience, really, sitting under a tree in the jungle in India. And what would you say? And what can you say to people that's going to be around, like that is timeless? So it's remarkable to me, those first teachings, that first noble truth, that unenlightened existence is dissatisfactory, is suffering. I mean, and to me, it's just like such a, if it were coming out of an intellect, which it's not, it's coming out of deep realization of reality, you might say. But even when we say reality, we're limiting. But nonetheless, if it were coming out of an intellectual, I mean, what an amazing intellectual discovery that would be. Because every single being shares this state of dissatisfaction and suffering, every single one. So immediately there's a basis in which we're all together, you might say. Even the worst people in the world, most deluded in the world, we have a quality that we share. And of course, when we see that shared quality, that is compassion. Buddhist compassion, again, we're a little bit limited in English, great language. But in Sanskrit and Tibetan, because the Tibetans did this in a very conscious way from Sanskrit, the terminology is so precise and hammered out and specific, going to these actual mind states. So it's very clear. There's not baggage in those terms. They're very, very helpful. Whereas a word like in English, compassion, has a lot of baggage. So you see often when they're talking about Buddhist compassion, it includes all the lower forms of compassion. It's just like supposedly the word for pride in Tibetan has 13 different kinds of pride. So one, there's the Vajra pride. That's what we should be developing. This confidence in what the Buddha taught, this confidence that when the Buddha said that every being is a Buddha, that we are too. That kind of confidence is Vajra pride. That's good. But of course, the qualities of that Vajra pride is not to suppress others, is not to lord over others. It's the opposite. Dalai Lama says it's the recognition of our commonality, you might say, or our actual debt of gratitude to every single sentient being in the infinity of time. So he says that the Buddhist view is looking up to all the suffering sentient beings, not down on them. It's completely upside down. And this is the genius, you can see, of the teachings. Because when you share someone with something else, there's automatically compassion there. Because that compassion, Buddhist compassion with a capital C, is wisdom with a capital W. It's wisdom, but it's interpreted, or better yet, as it's experienced in a dualistic state that we're all in as human beings. So that compassion with a capital C is wisdom. That is our true nature in the way that we are experiencing it, you might say. When you see your commonality with someone else, there's automatically a lessening of this radical alienation. You see this like overseas, say. I remember, going to Europe in 1970 and just sort of banging around. And you're in a world with a different language going on, right? Say in France. And then all of a sudden you hear someone speaking English. There's like an immediate recognition. A recognition of what? A recognition of shared conditioning, of shared ethnicity, of shared historicity, all these different things. There are a million different things we can say. But what I'm getting at is that meaning, that feeling of recognition, that feeling of togetherness, that feeling of oneness. Even if the person is being the worst kind of jerk tourist that you can imagine, and you did see that sometimes in Europe. I always get a kick out of it, like when someone's speaking English to someone. I'd see this in France, And, the French person doesn't speak English, doesn't understand. So the American would just start talking more loudly. Like that was going to help. Where's the bathroom? Where is the bathroom? That's what we do. But even in situations like that, you can see the humor in it because you've been in that same situation. Or, take the example of, a teacher with students. They know what the other teachers are up against, so to speak. A single mother, is never going to have 100% hatred for another single mother because there's a shared recognition. So that's where Buddha started his teachings. What do we all share? It's really amazing. Whether it's Sister Mother Teresa or Vladimir Putin, this recognition, this feeling of somehow things are slightly off, and we're trying to correct that. Now, of course, there are differences in the methods that are used. And what the Dharma holds out is a radical understanding because it's about realization. And this is so completely empowering because it's not something that's gained from outside. We're not having to buy something from some charismatic guy or plug into some sort of an institution and just give it money and then that's really all there is to it. Or just sort of follow the rules and then, automatically you'll be favored and the rest of the world's going to hell. I mean, all these kind of limited attempts to get at this truth that each one of us feels down there. If we didn't have this sense of the rightness of our nature, we wouldn't experience suffering. We experience suffering because somehow it's off center. In Sanskrit, there's this term, the viparyasas, I think it is. It means the upside downness. This is our wrong view, that we see things that are permanent, not subject to birth and death. We see things like that as if they're impermanent. Everything appears to us as impermanent. We see things that are selfless as having a self. These are the upside down views. And the image that the Buddha used was in a cart, like an ox cart in ancient India. If you didn't have the axle right in the center of the opposing wheels, everything was, it was going somewhere, but with lots of friction, lots of noise, lots of frustration because it wasn't going, things weren't working. And then the mental upset because of that, because it should be working all right, but it's not. All of that. This is the situation that we find ourselves in. And yet, the teaching is that that axle can be put right in the middle of the hub. This can go smoothly. So we're extremely fortunate because we have these teachings that are timeless. And they can be practiced. They can be tested. Again, the Buddha said, don't accept my teachings because I say so, or because some wise old man says so, or your tradition says so, or the village elders or whomever, but only after you test it with your own experience. And then with your reasoning and your experience then is proven to be true, then rely on it. So in a sense, it comes down to our own confidence, our own faith, and how do we do that? How do we increase our faith? Well, we do it through experience. Again, it's like a mother with a child. The first time I have somewhere out there, this is before the days of cameras and all the photos that people take now. But there's a picture of me with my firstborn, and sort of holding her at kind of arm's length, like, what is this creature? I don't want it to get too close. You don't have any confidence because you don't have any experience. You don't know. I mean, they're amazingly tougher than I thought, They're like this rubbery little things. But with experience,
actually bends.
Oh, wow.
So their ribs can't break.
Yeah.
They're actually what the future level.
For the Zoomers, there's a comment that the child an infant's skeleton is so flexible that even like the ribs, they can't break, they bend. But nonetheless, with experience, that all goes away. So when our kids were little, they went over to a neighbor's house, and the neighbor had a whole bunch of kids. She had more experience than us. And she gave them, the kids somehow got paintbrushes, old used paintbrushes, and a bucket of water. And they were sticking the used paintbrushes in this bucket of water, and they were painting, the garage door with water. And one of the older kids came in to the mother and said, Mommy, little Joey is sucking on the paintbrush. And of course, when I heard this, I was totally freaked out because, you can imagine all the things that are wrong with that. But the mother who had more experience, just took it completely in stride. And she said, tell him to stop. It's okay. This is wisdom. This is compassion. In one Chinese poem, it says the bodhisattva, what's the expression of great compassion, great bodhicitta? It's like grabbing your pillow in the middle of the night. It's a little bit off. You're off your pillow, a little kinky. You just grab the pillow and pull it under your head. You don't look around for someone to tell you how wonderful you are by grabbing the pillow. You're not thinking, I'm doing a wonderful thing, grabbing my pillow. It's all just this complete flow. It's completely non-conceptual. So nonetheless, we live in a realm where our mind is full of concepts and all sorts of impressions in that. And the Dharma has developed to give us the tools to deal with that, to use all of those things. We use concepts to get beyond concepts, but we can't just pretend that we're beyond concepts already. We see so many mistakes in the world, in the religious world especially, but in a sense, all worlds are religious because, people are attempting to I can't remember what the word is in Latin, to reconnect. Latari, I think, in Latin is to tie, to retie, tie yourself again back to reality. So we gain experience, the experience that is necessary, the confidence that is necessary, the rational confidence, not blind faith, but based on what? Well, we got to rely on something. You have to take a leap. That leap is the leap of learning. When you're in third grade and they're giving you multiplication tables, you don't say, well, I'm not going to do this until I absolutely know something's right. No, you try. And we judge things on this kind of experiential involvement. And the Dharma is no different. But we can see at the same time, you can see the Dalai Lama and you can see what happens when your country is taken over, when the things that are most dear to you are burned and destroyed. How do you react to that? In moments of crisis, we discover, where we're at spiritually. And it's very helpful. And with this training in the Dharma, the little 37 Bodhisattva practices, it tells you when your shortcomings are broadcast throughout the world, what do? Well, it's right there. This is how a Bodhisattva acts. But the more confidence we have in Bodhisattva, Bodhi, awakening, Sattva, being, an awakening being. The Tibetans have translated that as an awakening warrior, because I guess it can be translated that way too. But of course, you're not at war with the outer world. You're not at war with other sentient beings. You're at war with your own afflictions, the kleshas. From living in a state of ignorance, a state of delusion, we create tendencies, and these tendencies take on kind of like a weight. They're empty. If we look at them, they're not there at all. But yet something like anger or depression or jealousy, whatever one of these kleshas you got going are all at the same time. They arise in the mind in a millisecond. And then they arise again and again and again and again. And so this stream gives the impression of being some solid reality that we got to deal with. But it's like, in the old days when Kodak made film for the movies, they're just individual frames of awareness, but one after another, and they're happening fast. So it looks like it's solid. The river looks like it's a solid thing. But even the ancient Greeks said, you never step into the same river twice, because it's all those atoms of water moving. So it's totally empty in that sense too. Now the Buddhist emptiness goes even further, but nonetheless, in this materialistic kind of way, it's all empty anyway. We can see that. And we have the advantage of having kind of a natural confidence in science, in our own history and time. And that's good because, we have this understanding of an atomic reality underneath this world of appearances. Very helpful. The ancients did too. But difference maybe to our age is that by and large, certainly our educated classes don't have the confidence in these profound teachings. So it's a little bit hard. I think people are kind of lost. You look at the contradictions. We live in the time when this is most favorable as far as material situation. The number of people that have been raised out of poverty in the last 50 years is just unbelievable. And I look at my own life. I remember my parents, after World War II, you see the pictures of all those soldiers in the Army and Marine Corps in World War II. They're all skinny. We're sitting around. I remember getting a little nickel Coke. I don't mean to sound like such an old fart, but sitting at the drugstore counter, where did those go? Buying a nickel Coke. And sometimes I'd splurge and I'd send 10 cents and they'd put some flavoring in it. So you get a cherry Coke, but this little tiny glass. And now, you get a McDonald's. Can I have a small Coke? That's medium. We don't like small anymore. We don't even call it small. Everything is sophistry. Everything is just words, lies in one sense. So we live in an extremely fortunate time. Air conditioning. Again, not to sound like an old fart, but when I was small, Phoenix was a little town. It was a city, but it was basically a town because not everybody had air conditioning. You can't live there in big numbers. Somehow we've done all of that, driving around in our cars, entertaining ourselves. It's really amazing. And yet the dissatisfaction is so hard. So it's kind of showing us that this state of dissatisfaction is what our kind of natural, that is untrained state is. Not something wrong with us. It's not something that's going to be fixed by fixing the outer. And in the midst of this, we have all of these Buddhist teachings. Buddha is always pointing in the right direction. And so these beautiful verses from Shantideva, it's so profound, so practical, so immediately useful, keeping us in the right frame of mind. It says, you're confronted with a world covered with thorns. And really, you only have two strategies. You can either try to cover, and you're barefoot, you can either try to cover the entire globe with leather so you can walk on it, or you can put on a pair of sandals. The only thing that works is putting on the sandals. I can't control other people. So I'm amazed. I'm just truly amazed at the practicality, the good sense. But further, your confidence, your faith is strengthened by contact that you can have with people that are traditionally trained in this way. It is really amazing. Garchen Rinpoche's life story, and then having an experience with someone directly like that is, it just cuts through all the baloney. It's a tremendous, tremendous thing, and that it's accessible, that it's here, that the teachings have survived. Is one of the qualities of the precious human life, is that the teachings of the Buddha have survived. because there are times when the Dharma is inaccessible. You can't find it. So to have those examples, that's the greatness of the historical Buddha, is that it was like a breakthrough kind of understanding. When we do these prayers, there's just so much in them. Again, the precision of the thought. I mean, if compassion is a vague word with lots of baggage, how much more so enlightenment? I mean, for some people, enlightenment is Thomas Jefferson or Voltaire, and we use that word in that way. But this is in a profound realization way. So in our opening prayer, may all mother sentient beings equal to space have happiness, be free of suffering, and quickly attain precious, unsurpassed, perfect, complete enlightenment. That string of adjectives there is one word in Sanskrit, Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. So they poured over this. They had the great realization of the Buddha, and then him transmitting that realization through his example and teachings to other beings. And then they were all working on this because their motive was to help other people. You have to communicate, as opposed to the idea of just sitting there in your own perfect enlightenment, so to speak, and I'm fine, I don't need anything else. Which is true, but at the same time, they saw that that wasn't complete. And so they went on, developed all of these teachings. The Tibetans, to our great benefit, sacrificed over centuries to transmit the full range of these teachings to India and now to us, even in our misapprehension or incomprehension. This is really, really, really a wonderful thing. I think in my own stumblings around with this, I joke, I would guess that there's nobody in this room, nobody hearing my voice right now, who suddenly had some moment when they were 13 years old and said, you know what I want to do? I want to somehow be associated with the Drikung Kagyu. Nobody. That speaks to something deeply profound within you that is like the lotus opening up, that is unfolding. Something greater than our scheming mind, our planning mind, even the good things that are there in our planning and all that, but our machinations. There's something more fundamental. And to have that manifest in this world of appearances is truly rare. Bhatta Rinpoche's teachings on the precious human birth, he says it's like compared to all the forms of existence and all the universes, he says it's like taking a handful of dried peas and throwing against the side of a barn door. The number of peas that will stick, that represents the rarity of the precious human birth. It's staggering. These great telescopes that we put up, Hubble and the Webb, they're really wonderful because, you just see the vastness is beyond vastness. The Buddhists thought like that way back then because he had experienced the vastness of his mind. So for us, we're presented with these Dharma teachings. And the good thing about, again, what's called Tibetan Buddhism, but it's not really Tibetan Buddhism. It's the Buddhism as preserved in Tibet, as practiced, as transmitted through the Tibetans. And what's wonderful about it is that it is complete. 84,000. There are a lot of teachings that have been lost, but still 84,000 still there. And this is very helpful because the tantric teachings themselves are particularly easily misunderstood. And yet they're so skillful, and they are skillful in ways that you learn from doing them. So for instance, an example I gave the other night, we are like hardwired for delusion. Kalu Rinpoche has said, well, there's fundamental ignorance, which is basically the way that we don't see things completely, right? Can't be helped. Even, you see the spectrum of light that the bees are aware of compared to us. So there's limitations. There have to be limitations to survive. But nonetheless, there's a fundamental ignorance, not knowing. But then there's determinative ignorance. That's where we're working hard to make our ignorance even thicker. So we're acting out of our kleshas, these senses that we have from acting out of ignorance for all these lifetimes. So how do we work with that? Well, first of all, there are all the teachings about bodhicitta and kindness and that I've been speaking of here. It's all eroding away that radical alienation that we feel that allows us to justify the cruelties that we do and the stupidities that we do. But when you come to the Tantra, it's even more experiential. So the way that we're hardwired for ignorance, right? We've worked very hard. And we're this as human beings, we've got all this merit that allows us time and leisure to be able to work on ourselves. But we also have enough dissatisfaction that we're motivated to work on ourselves. So that's good. But still, we're hardwired in this delusive kind of way. So right now, here I am, I've got some responsibilities for White Lotus, and someone comes in the door right now with a big bar of gold and said, you know what, I'm giving this bar of gold to White Lotus. Now, what's my reaction? Well, first of all, happiness, sure. But what's the next thought? What if this place burns down? We better increase the insurance. I've got attachment to that gold. I'm wired for attachment to material things. So I'm reacting to that gold. And I'm thinking or greed, I wish he had given more. You know what I mean? There's all sorts of stuff that's triggered by my fundamental misapprehension of that gold as being a material thing, not an empty thing, just solid, absolutely existing as gold. So all that's going on. Very hard to deal with. It said that the sutric practices that are dealing with our emotional reactions like that, will lead to Buddhahood, but takes a long time. But in the Tantra, I'm imagining myself to be a Buddha, right? I visualize myself to be a Buddha. And Tara has a crown of gold. I don't have any attachment towards that gold. There I am dealing with the gold. It's so skillful. Because I'm dealing with what? My mind, my thought, this manifestation. That's an empty thought too, but it just doesn't have the baggage. Therefore, it's more skillful. So this is this wide display of practices and teachings and understandings that we're given. It's all so helpful. And when it comes down to mantra, originally I just thought mantra was just like, well, that's for lesser. What do you mean? Just babbling these syllables don't mean anything. Of course, they do have meaning, but in my ignorance, I didn't know they had meaning. So I assumed I knew they didn't have meaning. Isn't that how it works? And you say mantra, and there's no effect. So I don't believe there's anything here. But you can find yourself. This is the greatness. Why do these great lamas spend so much time even bothering with organizations? Because you can find yourself in a situation like whether in a retreat or wherever, and there's a social pressure. Everybody's saying mantra, I'm going to say mantra too, because who wants to be the odd guy out of 100 people who's not saying anything? So you say the mantra, and despite yourself, do that for 10 years. And then suddenly you can have an insight through the repetition of the mantra. You can hear the timelessness in Garchen Rinpoche's voice. And then, despite all that doubt that you had, all the half-assed repetition that you've been doing for decades, and then faith is strengthened. A little bit more faith, because you've seen through your absolute ignorance. It's like to do a prostration. What comes up? Oh, I don't want to do this. I'm tired. Can I skip it this time? Why am I doing this? If you're 100% arrogant, the prostration still brings up opposition to that arrogance, which is showing the empty nature of it. If you're 100% arrogant, you never have a thought that is not arrogant, or you're never in debating with yourself about arrogance or whatever you're doing. So this is inherently skillful. We don't have to try to make the practice work. The practices work. You put your hands together in the prayer gesture. It has a different physiological effect on you than putting your hand in the raised fist. It's extremely skillful, but it's so down to earth and skillful that we don't even give it any credence. Someone made the joke once is that, you get a call from some stockbroker in New York City selling you a bag of garbage, and you're thinking like, oh, this guy's out of town. He must know what he's doing. You might be living next door to some sort of financial genius, but you'll never listen to him because you see that guy all the time and you don't like the way he mows his lawn. And he's got an ugly cat that pisses in your garden. I mean, this is human beings. This is what we do. So the greatness of the Dharma is one that, here it is, 2,600 years. Something must be working. Years ago, I came across a quotation. This is written in 1952 by Professor Kanzi. And I came across this in the 1960s. He said, to a person who is thoroughly disillusioned with the contemporary world and with himself, Buddhism may offer many points of attraction in the transcending sublimity of the fairyland of its subtle thoughts, in the splendor of its works of art, in the magnificence of its hold over vast populations, and in the determined heroism and quiet refinement of those who are steeped into it. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I wanted to read one other thing to you, which I've been prattling about lately, because I just discovered this myself, to show you the non-sectarian nature of this. In other words, we're dealing with reality. We're not dealing with a set of beliefs. The beliefs themselves are provisional, and that doesn't mean to discount them at all. They're sacred, really, because they're reflecting reality itself. But nonetheless, so this is from the end of, you might say that Western civilization has been based on, maybe you'd say this putting together of all of the Judeo-Christian traditions from the Middle East, and then the Greeks, this putting this together. This happened in a very interesting kind of way over some centuries, and there were Islamic scholars who had rediscovered Aristotle, so to speak, and then that flowed into Christianity, basically through a bunch of scholars and great figures, one of them being Thomas Aquinas. And then that kind of theological understanding was expressed in this great poem by Dante in Italy. So this is all in the 1200s, So Aquinas and Dante. So Dante wrote this great long poem in 3 parts. One was hell, the inferno, and then purgatory, and then paradise, heaven. So he's on this, Dante himself in this is going a journey. He's given guidance through these 3 realms in this discovery of truth. But this is at the end of the paradise. I made my vision one with value infinite. Oh, the abundant grace, whereby I dared to pierce the light eternal with my gaze, until I had therein exhausted my sight. I saw that far within its depths there lies, by love together in one volume bound, that which in leaves, pages, lies scattered through the world, substance and accident and modes thereof, fused as it were in such a way that whereof I speak is but one simple light. We're not dealing with a belief system per se. We're dealing with the reality of our own mind, and the reality with a capital R, a reality that's beyond the term reality. This is something that people have discovered to one degree or another throughout time. Why? Because of suffering. They're motivated because of suffering, and this inner sense that there's an answer to that suffering, that there is something more profound. It may be unarticulated, but that sense is there. We wouldn't be doing any of this. And so the Buddha started with that teaching, and everything that flows out of that has been a blessing. Okay, we'll stop there this morning, take our tea break, and come back and do some practice and, you know, a little news and stuff too. But first of all, any questions this morning as we break? Okay, let's take a break. We'll ring a bell, and like Pavel